Here's why am I not? I don't know why I'm not. You're not seeing my PowerPoint, right?
No, we see the PowerPoint. At least I
You
do.
the
Yeah,
PowerPoint?
yeah, it's not in presenting mode, but we can see it.
How come I don't see it on my screen? Share.
Yeah, handling
I see is
Zoom
Richard.
and PowerPoint is always a little bit tricky on one
Richard
screen.
is, for some reason, is dominating uh, my screen. Richard, will you stop dominating my screen, please? I don't know why you are so dominant.
So, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know at this point. I see your PowerPoint, so I'm not sure why.
But I don't.
Yeah, I understand. I just don't know why you are not.
Let share. I think I have to do, I'll just try to get just me shown, and I can't even do that. Speaker. All right.
What if you minimize Zoom? If you minimize it?
Minimize the Zoom. I I don't know. I absolutely am presenter layout, content only. Let me click that. Content only. No. Share. All I get is Richard instead of my PowerPoint.
That's weird because I've got your screen up and I've got
Yeah.
your PowerPoint.
And it doesn't give me an option of getting rid of you. I apologize, everybody, but I'm having trouble getting rid of Richard here.
Are you able to unshare your screen and then share it again?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Stop share. All right, good idea. Whoever suggested that, thank you. All right, unshare my screen. And that hasn't stopped anything. Remove pin. I don't know what.
Yeah,
well, I
the
got
pin.
me. And then
You might have pinned Richard. Then you can pin someone. Then you will only see this person.
Like a butterfly, huh? Okay, now let me see about share. No, I don't want to share. What do I want to do?
You do want to share. You want to share screen.
Sharing sounds good.
Okay, share, and then I'll get the screen there. Click that and share that. Okay, now I can see my PowerPoint.
Yep.
And I can see some of you. And there we are. Okay, are we all ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, here I am, folks, back from my vacation. A year older. Yesterday was my birthday. I just turned 83, and I got a haircut.
Congratulations.
Happy birthday.
Oh, yes, thank you. Congratulations for all of that. And here we are in our energy class, and this is probably the most boring lecture. And I apologize, but I have to make this lecture in order to have the interesting lecture and next time on biophysical economics and the discussion, which I hope you will all be actively engaged in following it. So here we go. We're going to talk about conventional economics, an historical perspective of conventional economics. Okay, you all hear about economics every day. It's in the news. Candidates in presidents and congressmen all say that whatever they're going to do is make the economy better. And it turns out that it's the most important political issue for Americans. They care more, they say, about the economy than they care about anything else, migrations, wars, whatever. So here we are. Let's see what economics is all about. And it's very important to understand that what we call economics isn't something that's a real thing. It is almost an accident that we think about economics the way that we do. Now, you think about economics, what does it mean to you? A roof over your head, food on the table, whatever like that. But that's not how economists think about it. And we'll go on from there. Now, why do we use the kind of economics that we use today, which is called neoclassical economics? And I'll explain that. Why do we use that approach of economics, given that there are many possible approaches to economics out there? Why do we use neoclassical economics to make our decisions, to make government policy, to do whatever? And the reason is that, well, I'm going to tell you the reason why we do, but a cynic might say it's because neoclassical economics, the kind of economics we have today, gives a justification for the rich and powerful to exploit their own poor and middle class, as well as a justification for colonization. Now, I have to admit that I am a cynic about this. In other words, I would say the reason we use the kind of economic system for analysis that we do is that it's a convenient tool for the powerful to exploit others. I don't know. Now, I don't want to get into any political squabbles, and you're welcome to disagree with that, but there we go. Now, economies exist. These girls have been out shopping and have their coffee and donut or whatever, and have blue nail polish for their nails, and they have nice clothes and all of this kind of stuff. That's the economy. The economy provides goods and services, good being a donut and a cup of coffee, and services being providing them. That exists. Whatever system of economics you might choose to analyze it, those things exist. But economics as a discipline did not exist before more or less 1900. We didn't even use the term economics. There were economists, but they called themselves moral philosophers. I don't hear many economists today using the term moral or moral philosophers. It's deliberately amoral is one of the characteristics of neoclassical economics. Now, how do economies work? How come these girls are able to buy their scarves and their coffee and their whatever? Well, some famous economist long ago, when there were fewer people in the United States, said, because 100 million people get up in the morning and go to work. Well, okay. And they produce goods and services, and money goes around and we buy them. But economists generally try to come up with a more complex rationale. Now, the first recognizable school of economics, and now I'm going to do a historical assessment. Now, I'm going to tell you later that there are three, and I don't include these. So this is maybe 0 or something. The first was mercantilism. This is the first group of people in the West, at least, that thought about economics, and they were interested in how a nation made wealth. And they thought that the way to do this was to aid the monarchy in generating wealth. And the monarchies were always broke and needed money for armies and for their fancy palaces and so forth. And so it was the duty of the king to protect the production, the jobs, and the state revenue. And what they wanted was a positive balance of trade to gain treasure. Treasure meant normally gold coin or silver coin that you could use for whatever you wanted, and very often for armies, to pay armies. And so the idea of the mercantilists, those, and we don't have the names of these people, nobody knows who came up with this really, or I don't certainly, is the mother country, that is some powerful country in Europe usually, would have colonies, colony A and colony B. So Britain would have Barbados in the Caribbean, and they'd have Canada, what we call Canada now. And what they do is import raw materials at low prices, export finished products that they could manufacture at high prices. So import cotton and export clothing to both the colonies, but not allow the colonies to trade with each other, that which would undermine the power and the influence of the mother country. I mean, it was just blatant exploitation by the mother country, and in order to get gold, silver, and other metal currencies. And that's what they said they were going to do. And so here's taking a look at the mother countries here, Denmark and Norway. Great Britain is classic example. France, Spain, the Dutch very much, and so forth. And they had these supposed relations with their colonies in North America. So this is, I suppose, around 1700 more or less, and with the West Indies. And the Pope drew a line down South America, giving the Portuguese the eastern half and the Spanish the western half, which is why Brazil speaks Portuguese and these countries speak Spanish today. And so remember, we talked earlier about how the winds, the energy of the winds and understanding which way the winds blew allowed there to be a three-legged trade from Europe down to the West Indies or to northern South America. And then sometimes they'd go to Africa first and get slaves and trade to North America and bring back fish, timber, tobacco to the mother countries and sell them manufactured goods with the idea of accumulating treasure or gold and silver back in Europe. That was the plan from the first people who thought about this. And here's a depiction of some wealthy people in India meeting with some wealthy people from England. I assume this is taking place in India, and arranging for trade. Eventually, the trade was enhanced with British soldiers and muskets. But anyway, I suppose this is saying the first trade was peaceful. And so that was a colony you see over here in India, was a very big British colony. And that's why the British drink tea, if they still do. And here's a rather benevolent painting of a French seaport in 1639. And all of these buildings along the harbors would be storage areas for these ships, which had been often sailing for many months at sea, bringing in raw materials to France and storing it, and then later distributing it through mostly the elites in France. Okay, now, the first people to think about how economies in general worked, well, I don't know whether we should call them the second group, because the mercantilists were the first ones. The second were what are called the physiocrats, and they were French. And this is Canet on the left here, and then this another guy, Turgot, who we're going to talk about in a minute. And they believed all wealth came from the land. And Canet, who was a physician, he was a physician for King Louis XVI, saw similarities between the flow of goods and services and the flow of blood in the human body. And so they believed that all wealth came from the land and that the agricultural class would generate the first level of production. And that would include forestry products, but also agricultural products. And they would go, for example, wood to the class of artisans. And then there would be a class of proprietors. Now, obviously, there are many other types of people in a society, but this was Quenet's table économique, in which he was trying to understand how wealth came to be and where it went. But the important thing for these people was they thought the soil was the source of all wealth. The land, sometimes they use the word land and sometimes they use the word soil. Now, in 1774, Jacques Turgot was appointed a quote-unquote controller general of the finances of France by Louis XVI. And the finances of the French government were in total chaos because of the bankruptcy of the government. They'd tax and tax and tax, but they'd spend it all on ships that supported the American Revolution, for example, and on luxury items in the courts. And he said that the government should institute a policy of retrenchment through deep cuts in spending. He also told the king that he realized the anger he could expect from those who had become accustomed to financial favors, privileges, and subsidies from the government. And here's just a look at the French court back then. Now, we have to realize that if Turgot had been successful, the American Revolution would not have succeeded, or at least not when it did, because it was French ships that bottled up Yorktown and allowed Washington to have his final victory. So, but anyway, in the meanwhile, there's all this luxury in the French courts, and that was generated from taxes. So the physiocrats were unsuccessful in getting the French to run up the debt, and that debt eventually led to excessive taxation and the French Revolution, and many of these people losing their heads. So they used to take that very seriously about how much you taxed the various people who might come back and cut off your head. I think if we looked at the debts that we're running up now in this country as we try to have more guns and maybe the same amount of butter, and our tax, we're really running up the debt in our country now today. So these ideas just keep repeating, just keep recycling. Now, what the physiocrats really believed on was free trade. It shall be free to all persons, whatever to carry on as it may seem best to them, their trade in corn and flour, to sell and to buy it in whatever places they choose throughout the kingdom. And there was no need for the government to regulate the prices. Do not attempt to fix the prices, Kenney declared. Only competition can regulate prices with equity. There are people who say that today, of course. And they said same applied to international trade. And I just have some quotes, but they all say the same thing. And this is the source of what we call laissez-faire. Leave alone. Let goods pass and leave men alone to their own decisions. Now, we have today, one used to be able to say Republicans who were in favor of laissez-faire, and Democrats were in favor of more restrictions for environmental reasons or restrictions for protecting different classes of people and so forth. What's happening today is I don't quite know. Okay, that's the first class of people of economists in what they basically believed in. And I will stop just for a moment. Are there any questions about the physiocrats? And I don't see any or hear any, so I will go on. The second school, quotes, of economics is what we call classical economics. The first person which is assigned to that is Thomas Malthus. And he was both a reverend, I think, and an economist, but is best known for his theory that population growth will always tend to outrun the food supply, and that the betterment of humankind is impossible without stern limits on reproduction. He said the passion between the sexes was unlikely to diminish. I didn't spell that right. This thinking is commonly referred to as Malthusianism. Malthusianism. And he was pretty harsh in his pronouncements on that. And he thought that the upper classes were more likely to restrain their sexual urges than the lower classes, and therefore it was appropriate that they should be rulers. So here is a basic Malthusian idea that population will increase exponentially, and the point of crisis will come, and that the red is the agricultural production can increase only linearly. He didn't say exactly why that was, and that there would be a point of crisis when you couldn't produce enough food, which happened frequently enough in Europe. Not enough food was a common concern in 1750 or 1800. The next guy, publishing in this says 1819, but the first copy was a little bit earlier, is Adam Smith. And he considered to be the father of economics. And he's on the 20-pound note in England and has a statue here. I don't know where that is, Cambridge or something. And he wrote in Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And it's often called The Wealth of Nations. And a lot of people really like Adam Smith. I do. He was a great thinker for his time, for any time. And conservative economists, especially in politicians, love to quote this from Smith. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher or the baker that we expect our dinner. Not from their benevolence, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Now, this is repeating, in a sense, the virtues of laissez-faire, so that the butcher, in his own self-interest, will produce the meat that society needs, and he or the class of butchers will produce about the right amount of meat, simply as more butchers will enter the trade if there is not enough meat. Now, I suppose you have to grow the cows somewhere, so it's a little more complicated, cows or whatever, the animals. But he was a great believer, according to this sentence, in laissez-faire instead of government interference. But Smith was not exactly a conservative in today's sense. He's misquoted and misused all the time. It is not very unreasonable that the rich should contribute to the public expense, not only in proportion to their revenue, but something more than in that proportion. And when I was a paper boy and delivering papers in 1950s and Eisenhower was president, I would often read the papers in between customers. I read the front page. I'm in the fourth grade now, and I read it, and it says that the rich pay 90%, more than 90% of their income, above some level, in taxes. And I said, well, that makes sense to me. Still does. But now the rich pay a smaller percentage than the rest of us, because they have been able to manipulate the financial system. We'll talk a little more about that. Smith said virtue is more to be feared than vice because its excesses are not subject to the regulation of conscience. He was a moral philosopher. He thought the rich should not be given too much power. And he wrote another book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And if you think Smith is a conservative, then you don't want to read his second book. But he said the greatest prudence lies in economic self-interest only to secure the basic necessities. This is only the first step. And then he talks about what to do with excess wealth. He did not particularly trust businessmen. Remember, this is the symbol of conservative economics today, except he wasn't really, is the point I'm making. The interest of businessmen is always in some respects different from, and even opposite to, that of the public. The proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce which comes from this order ought never to be adopted till after having been long and carefully examined with the most suspicious attention. It comes from an order of men who have generally an interest to deceive and even oppress the public. So this is the man who's trotted out to support laissez-faire, but he doesn't sound like he's doing that here. So these are quotes right from his, I think this is from actually the Wealth of Nations. Now, this is an aside, but the defeat of Napoleon, gets sort of a bad rap, and a deserved bad rap, I suppose, but he was very liberal in terms of distributing wealth equitably. He did many amazing things that were in the public interest. And the invention of the metric system comes to my mind. I think the reason our children do poorly in math exams is we don't use a metric system, but that's another issue. But in where he lost in the Battle of Waterloo meant that the conservative political sentiments of England, which allowed the wealthy to keep and enhance their wealth at the expense of the poor, this was accelerated by the defeat of Napoleon. That's a complicated issue, but I'm just bringing it up. And of course, it led to, well, I guess it was subsequent. It was earlier than that, but I was going to say this led to the French Revolution, but the French Revolution was before Napoleon. Okay, the next great economist, and the guy I like a lot, is David Ricardo. He was actually a Spanish Jew who lived in England and was a member of Parliament, a very respected member of Parliament, really acknowledged for his intelligence. And he wrote The Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, 1817. Well, this says it's after Adam Smith, but I mean, before Adam Smith, it was actually quite a bit after Adam Smith. He is associated with these ideas. The principle of comparative advantage. If you can make wine in Portugal and grow wool in Scotland, then you should trade Scottish wool. If you're in Scotland, you should trade your wool for Portuguese wine. And if you're in Portugal, you should trade your Portuguese wine for wool there's a physical advantage. He doesn't talk about it from a biophysical perspective, but different parts of the world are much better for growing this or that or producing this or that, and that you should focus in your policies and your government edicts to produce what your climate, etc., produces best. He also is associated with the principle of diminishing marginal utility, that the more you use of something, the less useful it is of something. We'll talk about that later. He was very pro-free trade. He wanted to repeal the Corn Laws, which were English laws that said that you couldn't import corn, which means grain, from the continent where it could be produced much cheaper. And he thought that was stupid, that if France can produce better, cheaper grain, then we should import it. And this maintained the wealth of the upper landowning class at that time. And he also believed that, yes, Sharon, do you have a question? No? He also believed in the labor theory of value. Value came from the activity of people. John Stuart Mill was a great liberal thinker and wanted for humans to have greatest freedom of thought and whatever they wanted to do. And he did not like the despotism of popular opinion. Lots of ideas that are relevant today. Now, at the time, there was tremendous poverty in England, but the economists didn't really address these. It was more the novelist Charles Dickens and other writers that led to an improvement in the economic conditions for the poor in England. Okay, the next great classical economist, Karl Marx. We've all heard of Karl Marx. It's curious, though, mostly we misunderstand Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German who lived in London. He was poor, but he was financially backed by the wealthy Friedrich Engels. He is a much better source for understanding capitalism than of communism. He wrote very little of communists. He simplistically saw two main classes of people who he thought were inevitably in conflict. The bourgeois are owners of property, and the proletarians, the workers. And he saw them as always being, even though the proletarians, the workers, produced the wealth, the bourgeois who owned the property tended to accumulate the property, and Marx didn't think that was right. He thought there was a quote unquote scientific approach to history, which is kind of a stupid idea, but nevertheless. And he thought people would go, or nations would go through 6 stages: primitive communism, slave society, feudalism, capitalism, socially, and finally, global stateless communism. He thought it was inevitable. Marx's writings should not be taken to mean that everything that has ever happened is a matter of class struggle. It means rather that class struggle is most fundamental to human history. And if you take that perspective, you find out that it's fairly useful in understanding a lot of what happened in history and even happens today. Marx thought his ideas were most appropriate for the industrial societies, for England and Germany, and he would have been very surprised to see them taken up, at least nominally, by backwards Russia and China, which became quote unquote communist. He thought that once the 6th stage was reached, the state would quote unquote wither away, but he did not say how this would happen. He thought it was unnecessary to have a state. And in fact, communism was used by strong despots to consolidate their power. The 6th stage did not occur at all. It became, in fact, a means to enhance a stronger state. So Marx was quite wrong in that respect, with a lot of unfortunate consequences for many people in the world. So these thinkers from Smith, well, from Malthus to Marx, are called classical economists today. One thing that unites all of them is the belief in the labor theory of value, that economic value comes from the activity of workers. And most certainly Ricardo understood the importance of land and resources, and Marx perhaps energy, but the focus was on labor. Okay. Marx did say he was aware of environmental desecration. In modern agriculture, as in modern industry, the mobility of labor is purchased at the cost of laying waste and debilitating labor power itself. Moreover, all progress in capitalist agriculture is a progress in the art not only of robbing the worker, but of robbing the soil, i.e. soil erosion. Okay, now the critiques of Marx that's spelled wrong, Marx, are numerous. And so the Milton Friedman argued that under socialism, it would lead inevitably to an authoritative political regime. I don't know if it's inevitable, but it often did. A guy named Friedrich Hayek also believe that capitalism is a precondition for freedom to flourish. That's probably not correct either, but there it is. So some have said socialism instead involves individual freedom, and others are, in other words, you can get whatever position you want as to whether capitalism or communism result in freedom. And you have to ask freedom for who? And freedom for who to do what? And there's a great deal of confusion today in the freedom of the wealthy to exploit the poor is viewed as freedom for some, and others are the freedom for humans to reach their maximum possible personal development. You can get any view that you want, I suppose. But people have argued about that enormously, fought wars about it. Just amazing. Now, the classical economists founded on this question, and it's called the water versus diamonds paradox. And even Adam Smith wrote about that. But the classical economists could not solve that. And that is that water, which is essential to life, is worth almost nothing in cost per unit. But a diamond, which is useless for all intents and purposes, was just for sparkle, was worth a great deal. And the classical economists could not solve that problem. And, well, here's Adam Smith, and just saying what I just said. And so the formation of neoclassical economics, boy, I hope you're not bored by this, because this is what dominates economics that influences your life, your taxes, your use of money today, is all comes from these three people. William Stanley Jevons, remember he wrote The Coal Question, which I like, and he wrote the theory of political economy, which I do not like, and Karl Menger's Principle of Economics, and Leon Walras, not Walras, Walras, is Element of Pure Economics. They all wrote at the same time, and basically what they did was solve the diamonds versus water paradox in this way. And it was solved by what they called marginalism. And this is the number of units you have going 1 to 8,000 to infinity, say, liters of water. Now, you would pay anything, you pay everything else you own for the first liter of water in a day because you need it to survive. And you'd pay a great deal for the second liter of water, and for the fifth because you want to boil your vegetables, and your 100th because you want to take a shower. But there's so much water available that the price is determined by its great abundance. And so because water is so abundant relative to our desire or need for it, the price is very low. And diamonds are not abundant relative to our desire for them. And so the price is high. And this is this is called marginal because the last unit you want is called a marginal unit. It's at the margin. So the economists come up with all kinds of graphical and mathematical relations to determine how much something is. Supposedly, a supply gets more and more costly the more there is. The demand becomes less and less desired the less there is. Where those two graphs meet supposedly determines the price. And the economists say if you change the price or you change the quantity, what happens to the price? And they go on and on and on and do lots of fancy math on that. And that is the basis of the kind of economics that we do today. And the idea is it's the price of something is not determined by the action of the laborer, but by the desire of the consumer for that particular product. And so many economists today combine Adam Smith's concept of free markets and laissez-faire, and this is supposed to bring the maximum benefit to consumers with what they call Pareto optimality. And that's a whole nother, this Italian Vilfredo Pareto has written the mathematics of that in great detail. Economists tend to love that. But the idea basically is you can take the idea of the butcher and the baker working to their own self-interest and the desire of consumers to desire, let's just say, a lamb chop versus a loaf of bread, and that can be worked out into what is modern economics, focusing on the market. Logical difficulties with this approach, say environmental problems, were considered as externalities beyond the scope of economics. And what economics did at this time, 19, 20, 30, 40, was to absolve themselves of any concern about the social consequences of their economic decision. And they said economics is only about doing the math. And we leave the moral judgment as to what final product is desired, we leave that to others. And this was formalized in what's called the Mount Pelerin Society, or Austrian School of Economics, with their hero, Friedrich Hayek. And this approach is alive and well, and I would say dominant today. Their goal was often stated as efficiency, that is, to generate the most wealth, not telling who gets the wealth, to generate the most wealth overall from the economic productive resources that one has. And they criticize the labor theory of value, and they prefer the subjective theory of value. And British economists also criticized the labor theory of value. And so the original thinkers in economics have basically been sidelined. Economics became formalized through mathematical equations, and we came up with a definition of economics, the study of the allocation of scarce resources amongst alternate uses. And scarce meant relative scarcity, not scarcity in the sense that we might think about it, like not enough oil today or something like that. And resources usually meant money in your wallet. It had nothing to do with water or oil or soil. It just meant money in your wallet. It's just crazy kind of how it evolved. So today, all they worry about is the markets. We have households and firms. Firms provide goods and services to households. Households provide land, labor, and capital to firms. You see this diagram in first chapter of every economics textbook, and the money goes around in the other direction, and the total is the gross national product. That's the kind of economics we do today. Alfred Marshall came along and helped entrench this. And I'm not going to talk about him, I don't think. Important guy is Keynes. Now, Keynes, I think, was really interesting. And Keynes came along and he addressed a big problem they had in economics, that there was often a violent cycling of boom and bust, depressions and growth periods. Large depressions continued to occur, and they were devastating. In 1880 and 1892 and whatever years they were, they kept happening. And they seemed to be impervious to existing either classical or neoclassical economic thought. People couldn't get on top of it. And so here somebody plotted these depressions that came along about every 12 years or so, with a tremendous impact on the society. Now, I'm going to show you this, that over time, the depressions, the booms and busts became less. I think I'll use this theory. This is from one of my own productions. And this is back, I'm sorry, in the middle is about 1940. And we had very large variations. You see, this is the growth of the economy. And the point is, the annual rate of change used to be much larger, going up and down, than it did post about 1940 or even 35. And that's when Franklin Roosevelt brought in Keynesian economics into our government. We reduced the booms and the busts and had a more stable period during that time than we had previously. In other words, this guy, John Maynard Keynes, helped get rid of the terrible fluctuations that were inherent in capitalism. And he did it by essentially saying that you increase government spending in times of economic contraction, and you decrease government spending in times of economic expansion. And I am making the point that damned if it didn't work. What we did is we made the fluctuations go from 15% a year to 5% a year. I think Keynes brought more stability, financial stability, and well-being, economic well-being, to more people than anyone that has ever lived. Now, the conservatives don't like to hear that, because what is he all about? He's all about government intervention in the economy. But I would like to point out the empirical evidence is that Keynesianism worked. At least it worked until 1970. And so my hat's off to this person. Okay, now there's a dominance of neoclassical economics today for the past 100 years. Most economic or investment or governmental decisions, and well, they might be made for political reasons now, but anyway, before the last 10 years are made using discounted cash flow, cost benefit amount analysis you might hear, with the objective of maximizing profit. So much for moral philosophy. Such arguments as continue focus principally on whether or not we should take a monetarist or a Keynesian approach, which is basically how much government interfere. This is despite some clear problems today. Here's some major economic problems today. Unequal distribution. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That's true. Failure of the Phillips curve, I'll talk about that. Secular stagnation, we don't grow anymore. That's called secular stagnation. It's much worse in Europe than today. Inflation, we all know about that. Externalities, good Lord, what happens if we're destroying the atmosphere by pumping it full of CO2? And these all have a biophysical basis. They are not just about what we do with economic theory, but they're about their relation to the real world. Okay, here is just U.S. bottom 50% of wage earners, bottom 50% in 1971 got 20% of all of the GDP, but now they only get 12%. The top 1% used to get 12%, even when as low as 10% almost, but today they get 20%. So the rich have got richer, the poor have gotten poorer. The Phillips curve is that that unemployment is supposed to be opposite to inflation, and the way you decrease inflation is by increase unemployment. According, this is the Phillips curve. That's the theory. In fact, it doesn't work. You see how well it worked between 61 and 69, but when the price of oil went up, it went crazy. And now it's returned somewhat to those curves. That's what they're all arguing about with the federal interest rates. That's a big item in the news now, and who Trump wants to have a greater economic production, but in the hell with the inflation. This is the inflation, and this is the rate of unemployment. And the chairman of the Fed, who I can't remember his name right now, it's just been changed, says no way. But they're using, again, the Phillips curve, but when you increase the price of oil, we'll talk about that later, it doesn't work anymore. Secular stagnation. This is a rate of growth of US GDP from 1940 to 2010, and this continues. The rate of growth each year has gone from 5% to now we're happy to get 2%. Never mind that for the moment. We'll talk about it next time. And GDP growth for all of the rich countries, which is OECD, and for the world also has gone. Economic growth has gone from 5% a year down to 1 or 2%. That's the problem. Debt, of course, has ballooned, gone crazy. The debt that even Reagan got was nothing compared to Roosevelt. Roosevelt was blamed for all this debt, but he didn't generate debt anything like Reagan did later, or Trump is doing now, the supposed conservatives. It's something that's of interest to me, but I'm not going to get into. I'm going to say this. The quantity of GDP is supposed to be a function of labor and capital, according to neoclassical economics. But this only explained about half of the growth of the GDP. It's only half as explained by the increase of labor and capital. So what the economists did not have was they ignored the most important issues. And in this case, if you have to put energy into the equation, you put energy in the equation, which the neoclassical economists never did. And you explained 100% instead of 50% of the increase of GDP. Talk more about that next time. Here's what economics doesn't deal with: human economic growth. These are biophysical things. Increase of storms, of climate change, probably. Why is this so? It's because of the intellectual isolation of economics. especially its ignorance of and ignoring of the most basic laws of physics. Hardly anyone mentions the main driver of what's happening in our economy and its industrialization. This is a place in Germany. Everything you look at there is focusing on oil and gas and maybe some coal. And this is BASF company that makes, I don't know, tapes and other things. But this is what is driving the economy, the use of oil. More and more, especially oil, but energy more generally. In some 40 years ago in the journal Science, Nobel Prize winner in economics, Vasily Leontief, another of my heroes, surveyed the then present state of economic models and economics in general. He found them to be unable to advance in any perceptible way a systematic understanding of the operation of real economic system. Instead, they were based on sets of more or less plausible but entirely arbitrary assumptions leading to precisely stated but irrelevant theoretical conclusions. What does that mean? It says a Nobel winner in economics says neoclassical economics is bullshit, with which I agree. He extolled other investigators in demography, sociology, political science, ecology, hey, that's me, biology, health science, and engineering to help remove economics from the splendid isolation in which it is found. So for a long time, it seemed like neoclassical economics worked, especially if you were rich. And where are we now? Well, where are we now? I wrote this a few years ago. We're stuck in a hodgepodge of all these economic concepts. President Biden at the time is a neo-Keynesian, and it's sort of worked. The Federal Reserve is attempting to tamp down some of the resultant inflation. We're left with a legacy of Reagan-Bush tax cuts, and I like this. Keynes said, practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. In other words, their economists are still important, operational in our government, making decisions for all of us that have often terrible consequences, some of which I've listed, but I will just say, such as the enormous increase in the disparity of wealth. So, where are we now? And Senator Chris Murphy argues that it's all just the wealthy negotiating for their own advantage. Certainly looks like that's happening in Washington now. And that's where we are today, and that will lead me into, I believe, a truer understanding of the economy with my lecture on biophysical economics that is next week. Okay, I am done, and it's now time for questions. Did anybody understand that? Christian, are you raising? Oh, Rich Kinsinger raised his hand. Rich, yes. Go ahead.
A couple of comments rather than a question, Charles. One, it's interesting to note that Adam Smith's book, Wealth of Nations, was published within a few months of our Declaration of Independence, which means it's the 250th anniversary of both.
I'm sorry, what was published within a few?
Wealth of Nations was published within months of our Declaration of Independence.
Yes, indeed.
The other observation, I worked for GE, which between 1970 and 2000 roughly, under the leadership of a guy named Jack Welch, was maybe the most successful corporation in the United States, maybe in the world. And Welch was a passionate devotee of Milton Friedman. And in particular, Welsh often quoted Milton Friedman as saying, the only business of a corporation is to make money. The only business of a corporation is to make money. Just a couple of comments.
He was a real believer in neoclassical economics, wasn't he?
Yep.
And that's probably true. Now, Jack Welch did rather well being CEO of General Electric.
He did. I worked for them. I worked for them 1970, 2000, roughly that period.
Yeah.
And by getting stock options, I became a moderately well-to-do person, basically through Jack Welch.
Okay. And how about the lowest workers at GE? How did they do?
Actually, Charles, not that badly, because one of the things that I think it was Jack promoted was even hourly workers were able to get stock options. And that the theory of that was the workers were invested in the corporation, in the profitability of the corporation. And so in that respect, I think it was a good move.
There were some industrialists who did their workers very well. Henry Ford believed in paying his workers. He doubled their salaries so that they could buy his product.
Yeah.
And so it's sometimes rather complicated. But I'd like to hear more about Jack Welch. You know, I lived in New York State, and we certainly knew about GE, but you know, it was something that GE made the great turbines, the great electricity turbines.
Gas turbines, of course, aircraft engines. They were, I think, the leading manufacturer of aircraft engines. Maybe still are, I don't know. But gas turbines for power generation also.
Did you work on those kind of things?
I did not, no. I worked in
part of my career. So you don't know about Therm Company in Ithaca?
I worked, no, not there. I worked at the Corporate Research Center in Schenectady.
Yeah. Well, I used to go out with the daughter of the owner of Therm, who made the turbine blades for GE out of ceramics. And they did very well that way. Okay, Mary Ellen, what question have you got, or observation, or whatever?
Yes, I'm just a comment, but I feel like the current situation regarding the value of women and the big thing on tariffs really makes me think that this man is living more like in the 17th, 18th century, maybe. I mean, without
our president. You're talking about our president.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Are you talking about our president, this man, Trump?
I'm talking about our president, yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, well, that's how at the beginning of our country, the federal government got any revenues was having tariffs. But, you know, 10% tariffs, I think people don't worry about too much, but 20% or 50% tariffs are quite another topic. And, you know, quite frankly, I don't have any clue what Trump believes in. I think it changes day to day. So, but he does like tariffs, that's for sure.
I have a comment.
I mean, Mary Ellen, are we okay? Are we done? For the
yes,
moment.
I am done.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I guess a comment, and that connects to Rich's quote from Jack Welch that the companies just need to make money. basically, I would say that's like every other system in the world we live. Plants have to generate a profit to reproduce. Animals have to generate a profit to reproduce. So basically every system will, like Aeroy, right, will exploit energy and use it to expand. And so I think companies are just the same. So,
Do
I
you
mean,
know about the maximum power principle?
I do. We have been reading, we have been conversing about it quite a lot. So I think it's just in the nature of things.
And
That's the easy answer, Christian. But what we understand, and even Howard Odom wrote a lot about this, but more you would want to go to what was his name? The guy, the ant guy.
Wilson, E.O. Wilson?
E.O. Wilson. And what he talked about is that natural selection is not so much for individuals, but for groups of individuals, for societies, and even for systems, for ecosystems. There's so much what is called coevolution in an ecosystem between the fungi and the roots, for example, of trees, and underneath in the soil, and how many of the trees are connected to each other. And if you want to see this, it's not perfectly accurate, but it's really good. If you have compass, or if you have access to the public broadcasting, they did a recent presentation which is marvelous, and it's called wilding. Just look up the word wilding and see if you can. It's an hour presentation about a farmer, a wealthy farmer in England who could only survive as a farmer with subsidies from the government, and has gone and rewilded his plot of land. And he said, this land, all the land in England, has been totally disrupted with plowing that disrupts the underground stuff, and with chemicals, pesticides and insecticides and even fungicides. And he's gone back and tried to get the animal back, and the whole thing is about the connections between the different pieces of the system. So the thing is, if you are simply selfish and you do so at the expense of your system, then ultimately that will not be selected for. And I think Ed Wilson has probably developed that pretty well. And it's this Wilding movie. To me, I've watched it now 3 times. I liked it so much the first time that I invited my wife to watch it, and I just had my sister here this weekend, and we watched it together. And she, who's really hotshot lawyer, health lawyer type person, she thought it was great. So,
but wouldn't you say that also in an ecosystem, just comparing to one of the economists, that every organism is simply driven by its own greed, by its own advantage, but the sum will lead to which looks from the outside,
well, I think it's just
system,
like in an economy. It's a complicated mix.
but there's always
You have to be
competition.
some regulator of growth. If you grow forever, it's like the keystone species concept when the guy threw the starfish out of the tide pools and the sea urchins took over, and then everything died because they ate up everything. So there has to be something to stop growth as well as to allow. We're programmed to grow, but there has to be something to stop the growth, or we're doomed.
There's always constraints.
Max, it's a better
I
answer.
say there's 2 very interesting essays about population growth by John Stuart Mill and Keynes both wrote essays where they said if we had population stability, we'd have better quality of life. It
And
was
I
called
think that's
Of the
happening.
Stationary State in 1848 by John Stuart Mill, and Of the Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren by Keynes in 1930. And those are sort of, they're anti. So the reason I bring that up is the big question is growth versus no growth. On a finite planet, you got to stop growing, and that's the big argument with the economists, I think. Because
You will, because you run into constraints, and then your growth is blunted.
Yeah.
All around the world, people figured out by giving women options, education, etc., and that and they then have something to do besides essentially being forced to have children, or lots of children, and that the net result is greater wealth given the possibilities all around the world. And as our oil becomes more and more restricted, it becomes, I think, more and more important. So, yes. Melissa.
Hello. I was wondering if you could explain tariffs a little bit more and like how they've been, sorry about my dog, how they've been like weaponized. I don't understand a lot about that. And also how
what was the name? Could I explain what?
Tariffs.
Oh, tariffs.
Oh.
Sorry. And also why and how there's so much world debt. I know those are kind of.
Is the word you're using tariff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tariffs.
Can I explain tariff? Okay, so governments have the ability to tax foreign products coming in. Let's take the corn laws, classic example. Ricardo wanted the corn laws abolished. And what it meant was that any corn, think grain, any grain coming in from France, where it grew better, because France is a great place to grow wheat, for example. And if you could bring it into England and sell it, you could sell it cheaper than the English corn because France was a better place to grow corn. And the soils were not as depleted also. But the English said that if you bring in a pound of corn from France, we're going to charge a very large tax on it, a tariff. And we're going to charge, I don't know what they said, but let's say it cost $1 a pound. We're going to charge another $1 a pound as a tax on it. So it costs $2 a pound in England. And if it costs $2 a pound in England, then the average person in England will buy the $1.50 corn grown on English lands owned by the nobility of England. So the tariff is a tax to make foreign products more expensive than domestic products. What Trump was trying to do was by putting a big tax, for example, on a Chinese car, that China can make a car, an electric car, of a certain quality at about half the price as we can in the United States. So if you put a large tariff on them, they are not cheaper because the government is increasing the price, but keeping that, it's a kind of tax on the consumer. And Trump's idea is this will encourage American to manufacture more cars and Americans to buy American cars instead of Chinese cars. That's what he thinks. In fact, that does not seem to be happening. I'm not sure why. But at the moment, Chinese cars are taxed at a very high rate, and it's called a tariff. Tariff is just a tax on foreign goods.
Okay.
How am I doing in explaining this to you?
Good. I
Good.
saw something in the I think it was on Facebook, so I don't know if it's real or not. That there has to be tariffs returned now. Like is that a real thing?
Tariff returns?
Yeah, like there's been too many tariffs and now the government needs
Well,
to.
certainly American consumers don't like tariffs.
No, there was a Supreme Court case that reversed some of Trump's tariffs. So
Yeah.
now they have the real mess of trying to figure out how to give the money back.
Yeah, the question is, does Trump have the authority to do this? And Trump is doing all kinds of things that many of us think he doesn't have the authority to do. But he does so many things that are so contrary to how we're used to doing things that it's kind of hard for our legal system to catch up with him.
I think what Melissa is alluding to is that Trump is using tariffs as a means of political leverage, at least as much, if not more, than economic leverage.
Yeah. He's trying to get people, he said, he doesn't like what the German chancellor said about,
right.
His war in Iran not accomplishing anything.
Right.
And so, actually, it's a little complicated, but he increases the tariff on German cars. Trump has introduced a whole new concept of government. It's not new, but he's done it to an extreme, called retribution. Do what I say or I'm going to punish you, either with bombs or taxes or whatever. It's not normally the way we have done things in the United States, particularly anyway. We do it some, a little, all the while, but so it's a whole different way to go about running a government, and it leads to more and more power in the hands of one person, that person being Donald Trump. And I took a great course. I don't want to get too political here. It's not the purpose to be political, but I think people care and it's related to what we're talking about. I took a course in college. We were forced to teach at Colgate, where I went, and we had these core courses that were marvelous. A quarter of our time went to courses that were prescribed by the college, and that were synthetic courses that brought, in this case, political science and history and economics and stuff all together. It's called American Ideals and Institutions. And we studied what was going on in the minds of our founding fathers at that time. And what they were mostly afraid of was kings. They were afraid of one person becoming too powerful. They wanted the power to come from the people. Now, there was some difference in whether they wanted from an aristocracy of people or from all the people all together, which pretty much won out. That's called Jeffersonian democracy. The other may be Hamiltonian democracy. But the idea was the founding fathers were most afraid of one person becoming too powerful, i.e. a king. That's why these no kings days are coming up about Trump. And so what Trump is doing is saying, I'm going to change things so that I make most of the decisions. Because why? Because he's a bloody egotist, I guess. He's a very unusual person. And So from this, but the founding fathers did not want that, and they made in the Constitution, they deliberately have each piece of the government fighting the other pieces. So they deliberately made it hard to get things done in the Constitution. And Trump is sidestepping much of the Constitution, and one of his tools is retribution, which you can certainly see in the Republican Senate, you do what I say, or I'm going to undermine you and make sure you don't get elected next time, or I'm going to cost you money, or I'm going to do something bad to you. That's not supposed to be how it works. It's how it's working today. I hope I haven't said anything too political, but it's the way it is, you know. I'm just reporting, I think, the facts. Anybody who wants to argue with me. So, Melissa, we're going to leave you and go to Christian.
Thank you.
Christian?
Yeah, what you just said about people being afraid of one person being too powerful. I mean, I think the Roman state is a great example. They had a Senate. They've,
All you got to do is read
the citizens,
Marcus Aurelius. I mean,
the citizens figured things out, but they also understood that in certain times, it's actually good to have one powerful person to, have executive power for quick decision making. So they had the consul, which had, enormous power, but was only elected for limited time. So I think these struggles are very human. So we all know that one person being too powerful is dangerous, but we need powerful people sometimes to get things done. And well, Caesar was the one who changed the republic into a imperium.
All you have to do is read the history of World War II, and Franklin Roosevelt understood what was going on, but he couldn't. But the Americans didn't want to have anything to do with the squabbles of Europe, and so, I mean, what happened to a great gift to England and Winston Churchill was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which all of a sudden mobilized all the Americans and allowed Franklin Roosevelt to have enormous power in, for example, getting Ford to stop producing domestic cars and produce only military vehicles and so forth, and airplanes and whatever, and do all kinds of things. To me, I'm amazed at how effective he mobilized America so quickly to become what's called the arsenal of democracy. I mean, we didn't defeat our enemies in World War II with being better military strategists. We defeated them with our industrial production.
Yeah, with mass production.
When the, pardon me, German generals understood that we were producing a bomber a day, a B-25 a day, and the Japanese, which had spent 4 decades making 8 aircraft carriers, and we were making 1 aircraft carrier a month, they knew they were defeated.
And I mean, in the end, war is about
that. He'd studied in the United States and seen our shipyards, and he didn't want to attack us at Pearl Harbor, even though he designed the attack. He didn't want to do it. He says, I'll run crazy in the Pacific for 6 months, and then we'll pay the price for the rest of history. And in fact, he ran wild. The Japanese had better pilots, better planes. Zeros were better. They flew against my father and all that stuff. But they couldn't produce enough of them, and they couldn't train enough pilots because they didn't have enough gasoline. They couldn't train their pilots. Their first pilots, they had plenty of gasoline and could produce, but it was industrial production. You can say maximum power if you wish. That ultimately, not military strategy, although there was plenty of that too. lots of very
Absolutely.
clever things. And I could get into the details of that with anybody who wants to, because I'm very fascinated by the how well breaking the German code, and how smart these people were, and a guy named Dowding, how he figured out the radar, the system's approach to radar and airplanes and the anti-aircraft guns in England. Germany should have won the Battle of Britain, but they didn't, and they didn't because of systems thinking. And I used to teach systems ecology, and that was a big part of my course. So I was very fascinated by these kinds of things. Yes, Mary Ellen.
I just wanted to point out that the tariffs, returning the money is not going back to the people who bought the items. It's going back to the importers. So they will have a windfall because they sold the items and raised the prices to pass the tariff on to the consumers. But the American people are who bought these things are paying a sales tax. Basically, it's a regressive sales tax. I also wanted to suggest to you if you should read a book called The Second Estate. It's by Ray Madoff, and it's an exceptionally good look. The subtitle of the book is How the Tax System has Created an American Aristocracy. And it's an exceptionally good book, and I'm going to be trying to do some organizing around it.
Okay.
That's it.
I think it is. How do you deal with what I've taught today? Does that seem more or less accurate to you?
I don't know the history of economics. I took economics a long time ago, but I don't really know the history of it. And I would like to find out a little bit more about it, especially the economics of the 1970s through 2000. What the economic thoughts were at that time, because I think there have been major changes during that
Oh, yes.
period.
I think we're going to address some of those next week. How about that?
Good.
But I'll try to put in a little bit extra for you on that. Any more questions? Anybody have any suggestions or complaints or whatever else about the course in general? Okay. Well, that's it for today. And how come you've been so quiet, Elaine? Thank you. But don't you have a question, Elaine? You always have a question.
No, more a comment. Just it's striking to me as an environmentalist, it's striking to me that science is so now separated from economics.
Yes.
And I think it's destroying the planet. I think we're fouling our nest in a really big way, and it's very disturbing to me. And
well, I carry a sign. I suppose I could go get it, but I'll just show. I carry a sign in our demonstrations, no kings, etc. demonstrations, and it says, "Make America Great Again" by destroying our universities, destroying our science, destroying our alliances, destroying our healthcare. I got about 8 things on my sign. So, yes, I think we're doing some very seriously negative things in what we're doing. And I'm not quite sure there's always a tension between Trump is a strange mix of populism and what it fundamentally is an anti-elitism that you see the decisions in Washington are now given to people without particular training in whatever organizations they lead. It's anti-elitist that experts, including, say, Robert Kennedy with health injection. I mean, I've had an incredibly healthy life, 83 years, because I've been protected from all these diseases all my life by getting vaccines for them. And yes, there are sometimes some adverse effects from some vaccines, I'm sure. But you know, it's 99 units that favor you and 1 unit or 1 in a million that might disfavor you. You do the statistics, and these people don't understand statistics. And so what we're doing is getting rid of the elites, getting rid of people who have some knowledge about energy, like me, for helping making decisions. And we'll just say, oh, leave it to the market. Leave it to Joe Sixpack to decide which brand of beer he wants to buy. And that'll take care of everything. Well, that's not how I see it. Now, that's not to say that experts have often in the past made poor decisions or made decisions that help themselves. There's corruption at all levels, and there's nothing new about that. So it's complicated. And how do we deal with it? We deal with it professionally. We deal with it by training people to think about it and having them argue with each other in public about what this means and what that means. And let's get the facts on the table, and let's not lie all the time. And there we are, huh? Richard, thank you for help this morning, and all of you, and those of you who are left, and see you next week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
By the way, if
Nice
anybody,
day.
oh, I should have said this, but anybody, we're having a little trouble with Eric, who does is keeping track of all of the recordings. If you've missed a recording, you want to see the PowerPoints or anything, he's moving this week. And so it's a little bit ragged. If you want to see anything else, just email me. You have any problem at all, and I can take care of it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.